Good morning, everybody. Welcome to SafeDefend Live. Doc, I broke my fly swatter last week.
I saw that. I
I
saw
think I
that.
embarrassed Jeff,
That
and
was
I
a very
apologize
good.
profusely. Yeah.
That was a very good attention getter. I like that.
Well, today there'll be no antics from me anyway. I'm super excited to be back with Doc Becky for a week off with his family to talk about crisis intervention and tactics we can use to help stop the challenge, right? Stop the pain so the individual that's in crisis can get the help they need before anything happens. And folks, what we're talking about is before the event. How do we prevent this from happening before it gets to a point where somebody pulls out a weapon and tries to injure or kill somebody? We believe that we can work left side of this with teachers and schools first to solve the problem. And then worst case, there's the system in place if something does happen to keep everyone safe. So Doc, what are the best tactics? I know you're going to talk a lot about this, but I'm going to turn over to you on the tactics we need to use to help young people that are dealing with a crisis situation.
Thanks, Dave. And actually, this applies to anyone who might
Perfect.
Might become an active killer, active shooter. We focus a lot on schools, but for those who are listening for workplace, for places of worship, things like this, this also applies to that. Bring up the first slide.
All right, coming up.
So last time we talked to this a couple of weeks ago, kind of did the first thing and just kind of established, okay, what does it mean? So you got to realize that, just as a reminder, that the people that almost all of them that end up being active killers, active shooters, active threats, whatever you want to call it, any sort of targeted violence, it starts from a grievance, and we have talked about that, right? And the grievance can be anything. It can be bullying. It can feelings of being left out. It could be ideology. It could be, a number of different things. But the bottom line is that the person goes into a crisis, right? And the crisis gets so bad that violence becomes the answer, right? Go to the next slide. So then what happens is then they are in stage one. And then, of course, now we're talking about prevention. And I think this is probably one of the most important things to keep in mind in terms of prevention, is that the best way to deal with a crisis is through crisis intervention. Very few people understand what that means exactly. But what we are, just as an example, is now they're in stage one, right? Here's the problem with targeted violence. Here's a problem with active shooters and active killers. If the crisis is not dealt with, if it's not stopped, it will become expressed violence. Rather it's a killing, it's some sort of attack or things like this. And as we know from looking at these offenders, each one goes through these 4 stages, right, before it becomes too late, right, and it's no longer a prevention issue. And so at any point of these stages, if we stop the crisis, we stop the violence, therefore we prevent it. That's the concept. Now, in looking at this, and looking from a hostage negotiation perspective, why does it work? Well, what happens is that, the crisis becomes a crisis because they feel that, number one, they can't cope with it anymore, okay, like bullying or maybe losing a job or something like this. And then secondly, they usually try to get help and they fail in that for whatever reason. So as a hostage negotiator, as a crisis intervener, which we all would be, you're stepping in to become that social support, because if I eliminate the social support, or I become the social support, I eliminate the crisis. And that's the whole concept of crisis negotiation, which is why when I step in as a negotiator, I used to always say, hey, I'm Greg with the FBI. Are you okay? I'm stepping in to become the social support. And I get hung up on, I get the finger, right? I get yelled at, I get treated terribly, but it doesn't matter. That's what we're trying to establish with that person, okay? And then we go through various stages. So go ahead and pop up. So all we're doing essentially is we're becoming this social support. So if we look at this graphic again, as a hostage negotiator, I'm coming in. I'm not in position to teach them how to cope, right? I'm not going to tell them what to do because they're not going to listen to me. But what I can do is listen to them and be supportive. And that is how we eliminate the crisis, because if I become their support, crisis goes away. Next slide. So that's where we are. That's kind of where we left off from last week. Now,
Yep.
let's look at some easy things to do to become that crisis intervener. Where do I start, right? What we do is we have a strategy. We start out with listening, not talking. That's number one. We listen. And if you listen to someone, then you move on to the next stage, which is trying to understand them. The word for that is empathy, right? And once you get them thinking that at least you're trying to understand them, they're going to start to listen to you. You're going to build rapport. You're going to build some trust. Because here's the deal: you can't come into a situation and dictate or come from an I, me, or my perspective. It's got to be from their perspective, right? And so, in order to influence them, you got to build credibility. And for them to actually change their mind on violence, you actually got to have credibility with them. In other words, you got to diffuse the situation, which is usually emotional. And then you got to build your trust with them. And that's something that's earned. It's not something that you can dictate because I'm the teacher, I'm the boss. Okay. Go ahead, next slide. So here's basically the process, right? Very similar staircase approach. I developed this in 2010, and law enforcement uses it all over the world, but anyone can use this. Okay, and if you look at it as a staircase, what is our goal? Well, our goal is to get them to stop thinking about violence, to change their mind, and so we're eliminating the crisis. But before we can even talk about stopping the violence, we have to get them in a mindset to want to stop that violence through reducing emotions and building trust with that person. And that's all a hostage negotiator does. And it works well into the 90% in really bad situations where they don't know me. I'm a law enforcement officer. They don't even want me there. I'm not even part of the conversation. At least in these situations, you usually have some sort of relationship with that person in crisis because it's typically a kid or it's typically an employee. So I step in already knowing something about the issue. And all I need to do is just be a good listener, and that's the act of listening. Okay. And so that builds your foundation. So if you're looking at a stair or a house, we always talk about the foundation. If all else fails, you go back to active listening. Okay. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. The next thing is as you are developing your process, you are trying to get them to understand or think or believe that you're just trying to understand them. That's empathy, right? And then you start to connect with them. They start to want to talk to you. And then at some point, once they trust you, that's when you can start directing them to not do what they're planning on doing, right? Giving them options, giving them coping suggestions and ideas. And that's the beauty of it. And then once you get to the top, you get this, what we call the behavioral change. All that is that he's no longer violent. The kid's no longer violent. We've already established this because we've eliminated the crisis, we've reduced emotions, and we've built that trust. Every single teacher, every single parent, every peers, I teach this to peers, other kids, right? Conflict resolution stuff. But here's the core, this is the core of it, right? And so when you talk about active listening, what we're talking about is there's basically, four things that you got to think about. One of them we never think about usually. Okay. The first one is just mirroring. Just are asking after you ask, are you okay? Listen to what they're saying and repeat a few words. I'll give you an example. Let's say in a workplace example, let's say that someone loses their job and they're very angry about it. They're resentful about it. They're maybe thinking about being violent, right? But we don't really know what's going on. But we do know that there's a change in behavior. We do know this person's acting weird. There's concerning behavior, right? So we go up to that person. We say, hey, are you okay? And the person says, I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Then you say, you don't want to talk about it? No, I want to talk about I had a bad day. You had a bad day? Yeah, I had a bad day because I lost my job. Really? You lost your job? Yeah, I lost this job. I worked with this guy for 10 years and he fired me. Okay. Now, that's mirroring. And it works all the time because when people are in crisis, they want to, you're giving them an opportunity to vent and to find a way out because being in crisis isn't fun. No one likes it, right? So you become that social support to start with on the mirroring. Then all I do after that is I just take whatever he gave me and I put it in my own words. So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're having a really bad day because you lost your job because your boss fired you. And he'll say, yeah, or he'll correct me. Who cares? Then the third piece out of this 4-stage process is most critical, and this is what most people miss. You got to label whatever emotion you feel or hear. You usually say something like, you seem really sad about that, or you seem really pissed off about that. Okay. And then you wait for the response. He may say, you know what? Yeah, I am. I'm really pissed about this. Or he might say, you know what? I'm not pissed off. I feel really betrayed because I worked for this guy for 10 years. And then you summarize and you come back and you say, okay, so make sure I understand this. You're having a bad day because you lost your job. You worked for this guy for 10 years. You're having a really bad day and you feel betrayed and you stop and you make it awkward, the silence, and get his response. Now you're in. And now it's a matter of determining, getting the rest of the story and helping this person. And that's how hostage negotiation, that's how crisis intervention works. Very, very simple process. What we have a tendency to do is, instead of being a support, we try to become the coping mechanism and tell them what to do. And when you're telling someone what to do in crisis, you haven't built enough trust, and frankly, you don't have the permission to do it from their perspective. And so you got to slow it down, take time, be that support, and let it play out, because crisis intervention is not about solving anything. It's about getting that person into the mindset to solve the problem with your help. But he's got to view you as credible, and he's got to have a rational state of mind. He can't be emotional. That's the easy crisis intervention 101 that I teach hostage negotiators all over the world, as well as teachers and HR people and anyone else when you're dealing with someone who's in crisis. This is just a specific context in targeted violence instead of, a barricaded subject in law enforcement context. So that's essentially it. It's very, very simple.
Okay, Doc. I did this last time we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but man, every time I hear this, I see the conflict with a spouse, a husband and a wife, because I mean, this is gold. This is gold, because if we're fixers, we're getting in trouble all the time with our spouse because we're not following the appropriate hostage negotiation, crisis intervention path that you've built. I think that we need to model this for marriages and sell it.
It works.
But the crazy part of the reason it works is because it's talking about it's the biology and makeup of a human being, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes people don't want to be fixed. Right. They just want to be heard.
Right.
And if you're watching, I don't care if you work at Amazon, I don't care if you work at Walmart, I don't care if you work at Joe's truck stop, I don't care if you're a school teacher. Take this model. When things are going awry with anybody, step back, show empathy, develop rapport, and work through whatever it is, because this is crazy good stuff. I mean, it is going to change. It will change the way you operate as a business owner, as a teacher, as a principal, as a superintendent, if you just do this. And I honestly think that, everyone needs to know this training is available to you. We are more than happy to come to your school, your business, and go through this with your leadership team to help you have a higher performing business. Because my guess is if you deal with the people side of this the right way, they're going to perform better because they know you genuinely care. And I think the one thing I take from this, just listening to you, Doc, is that this is trying to tell somebody in crisis that, look, I care about you. I want to hear what's going on. I'm here to listen. And that's a big deal for some people because they have no place to go.
Right.
And that's why they step through the process and end up hurting somebody. Am I wrong?
No, you're perfect. It's 100%. I mean, you're stepping in as their social support because they don't have it. Right. And you're the only one in the world, in the whole universe at that time in place, right? That in that moment, who's listening and not dictating and not trying to overrun and argue or wait to, have a response for your answer. You're just listening and you are paraphrasing so that they know that you are trying to understand where they're coming from. Yep. And you are dealing with the emotions, because when people are emotional, their behavior is driven by the emotions, not by rationality, not by your thinking brain. It's running by your emotional brain. And as long as the emotional brain is running things, you cannot stop the violence. You can't change their mind. You really can't do anything but add more frustration to the situation. And it's counterintuitive because we are taught to speak from the rational actor, right? From the rational point of view, but they're not rational from that standpoint, yep. Right? They're emotional and they're in crisis. And your job is to step in as that support network, listen to them, build an understanding, and then offer help when they're ready. And they will be ready because you're going to build credibility and reduce those emotions. And that puts them in the mindset then to listen to suggestions. And actually, then that's when the violence stops.
Wouldn't it be great if we could teach and this will just focus on schools for a second, but every business owner, every school leader, this process, and we could eliminate the crises that are happening in our schools without ever having a police officer come in, without ever shots being fired, with ever anybody being injured, because we genuinely are looking for people with challenges and trying to help them and be their social support and not bully them and not push them away.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing to keep in mind in terms of just, between schools and workplaces is one of the reasons the schools are a little bit, it's more important for schools. I'm not saying it's not important for workplaces, but really important for schools is because you're dealing with kids, and you're dealing with kids that have no life experience because they're young, and they get frustrated, and their coping typically is much less than someone who is older, like in the workplace, who's an adult, because they're missing that life experience, and that's what makes them vulnerable, more vulnerable to getting into crisis. And what makes it even more important than in a school environment, this be just part of the policy, practice, and procedures.
Well, Doc, as my friend Bobby Boucher would say, they're operating solely on their medulla oblongata, right? They're not fully formed yet, so they're not fully functional. And this isn't being mean; it's the reality of biology. As a young man, like, I got balloons. That's nice. I don't know why.
I don't know either.
but the point taken, and people need to realize this, is it young people's brains, especially male brains, they're fully developed till they're 25, right?
Right.
And that's why you see what you see in full up puberty growing through boys between 12 and 25 acting like fools, is because part of it is that they haven't had life experiences, but part of it is they're operating on partial brain. And I don't mean to be mean by that, but they are, right?
Yeah.
And so their reasoning and logic piece is not fully developed. And that's important for teachers to understand. I know they do, but it's also important for business owners to understand that have 18 to 25-year-olds working in their company.
Right? Of course.
Because they're going to deal with the same things teachers are dealing with, especially if you're in a service type industry with young people out of high school as your technicians. So if you need help working through this and walking through it, we're here to help, and we want to see you do great things. So
please reach out. My contact is greg.vecchi, V-E-C-C-H-I, at SafeDefend.com. And my direct phone number, 605-920-0229. Please reach out. Let us help you.
Yeah, and if you can't remember all that, or you have to replay it, that's cool. But SafeDefend.com, all the contact information's there. Send us an email or give us a call. We are here to help. Doc, I hope that you have a fabulous weekend.
You too.
And I hope it stops raining here.
Yeah, me too. It's raining here also.
We needed the rain, so I'm thankful for that, but we can turn it off for a little while.
Yeah.
But not that much. All right, so everybody, thanks for being here today. We will see you guys next week. With that, Doc and Dave, we are out of here.
Have a great weekend.